r/AskReddit. Sex workers of Reddit. What was the saddest request you have ever received? In my younger days, I worked at a male review. I had this woman of about 40 something who would come in fairly regularly. She asked me to her dinner date. I obliged her request, as she was quite attractive. About 5 minutes in, she started bawling. And when I asked what's the matter, she told me I was an exact replica of her son whom she lost to cancer. She proceeded to show me pictures, and TBH the resemblance was uncanny. We chatted over the years since, but in 2018 she passed of cancer. RIP. Duck. Round it out with a joke or something. That was upsetting. The first client I ever saw asked me to spit in his mouth and tell him I loved him. Afterwards he told me his dad had cancer, and he took out a photo album and we looked at pictures of his dad's youth. Maybe you look like his dad, you might be the spitting image of him? Probably not the saddest, but it's the most recent one. Guy gave me $300 every 2 weeks just to text him and treat him nicely. No physical contact, no nudes or sexting, literally just wanted good morning and good night texts, and someone to encourage him as far as work and his hobbies went. Dude, the encouragement part is actually huge. I can totally see that. Just someone saying I hope you had a good day and you worked hard. I am proud of you and you're doing good things. Try and be good tomorrow. I've got a lot of stories, but honestly, the amount of guys I've spoken to in private who just needed someone to talk to be kind to them, to feel a connection with, it's a lot. I try to portray a very cheerful and kind persona as a cam girl, so I think I attract guys that are more lonely than horny. I've got a friend in his early 40s, who's a pretty book smart, good looking dude, but he's pretty emotionally immature and absolutely cannot connect with women. I've seen him try and it's actually quite sad. He more or less reverts to being an agitated 14-year-old. A few months back he told me he was looking for a cam girl just to talk to, since he was tired of not being able to talk to anyone, and that he found a few who seemed really excited to talk to him. He really is a nice guy. I didn't have the heart to tell him that for these girls it's just a job for them and there really won't be an emotional connection. I'm not sure if he ever went through with it. Not me, but a story told to me from a girl I know who used to be a sex worker. She had a regular client who'd come in every week and just wanted to talk, be held or innocent things like that. Never wanted anything sexual. According to her this wasn't that unusual, as some guys felt guilty about going to a brothel or just wanted fetishes satisfied. But she said this dude was different. From what she pieced together he had an extremely unhappy home life. It seemed the only happiness he had in life was the hour he spent with this girl. She said one time he booked an appointment but never showed up, and they never heard from him again. Back when I worked in a dungeon, while there was no penetrative sex or anything that would be classified as sex, no exchange of fluids etc., still classified as sex work though, one client came in. He was married. All he wanted was for me to put on a wig that matched his wife's hair, wear a certain shade of Louboutin lipstick that he brought me and his wife wore, and Dior perfume that he also brought and his wife also wore, and then have me compliment him while he told me about his day. He was a client up until his divorce and remarriage. Edit. To answer a few PMs. No, it wasn't his wife's lipstick. It was a new lipstick in her brand and shade. And no, I didn't pay for it myself, as it's $120 lipstick. I have my own cosmetics, but for special requests, they had to bring me unopened cosmetics, for safety reasons. The same applies for the perfume. I go fragrance free unless given a requested fragrance. Same rules with the perfume. For safety reasons it has to be an unopened package. They can take the products back after a session, but the next session they would have to bring me a new unopened package, so most let keep them for a future session. I used to cam as a joy denial dom and I worked with a guy who was really into being humiliated and didn't seem to believe me for quite some time when I told him I was into dominance IRL, off the camera. 2. I am not usually into the humiliation aspect but played along with him as he wasn't asking for anything too extreme and it was hands down the hottest session I've ever had. I always insisted on aftercare after a session because I feel it's negligent not to offer it, and he opened up to me for a half hour about how much pressure is on him constantly and how much of a relief he finds this particular kink to be. He was from a strict Midwestern family with very strict notions of masculinity, and there was so much catharsis flowing out of him in that moment. Like getting off with someone who was willing to let him be weak had torn down a huge dam of some kind, and it was all just running out. I'd heard a lot of similar stuff from clients, especially guys who were new at it, which I got a lot of. I am a non-threatening dom lol, but he was on a whole other level of wildly self-aware and intelligent and emotionally in tune. And it felt so tragic that someone that insightful and intuitive and sensitive should have spent a lifetime feeling the need to tamp it down. He had a really healthy view of his kink and the baggage associated with it, and I wished him the best and still do. And I hope he's in a better place and can express himself and his feelings of weakness and vulnerability publicly now too. I think of him all the time, probably once a week. I wonder how he's doing and if he found himself a girl offline to give him what he needs, now that he knows they exist for real and not just in porn. I hope so. If we'd lived in the same state I'd have come and ducked him for free lol. Not my story, but someone else's that somehow stuck with me. Owner of an escort service who shared a story of a guy who apparently was from a wealthy family, but as a child hardly ever saw his parents. He was raised by an au pair or nanny with beautiful long hair which he always combed for her as a kid. Into puberty he had got aroused from combing it. She noticed and gave him his first sexual experience. Since then the man always requested girls with long hair and only wanted to comb it and then get a hand job. Kinda sad thinking about all the parental love he missed and trying to compensate like this. I have known a lot of sex workers, and variations on this often came up when chatting. Mentioned a few times already about people just wanting to be held happens a lot. It's not viewed as sad at all. There are dozens of stories I heard that were sad in different ways, but the two that stand out are about a fairly young Australian guy who got his new friend for the evening back to his room, and when she was checking him in the shower she seen his junk was a disaster zone. She said it was all a swollen lump. He did not want sex. He wanted her to push pencils down his penis. She refused to even touch him and he started crying. The other story I remember is about a middle-aged European guy who, when he got someone back to his room, would make phone calls during sex. He would call his wife and kids and talk while in the act. He would call at weird times and say he could not sleep and he wanted to hear their voices. He could not do anything until he made a call and started acting the good husband and father. BTW, I was told this story by more than one person. He did it a lot. I'm a guy who shoots porn, so technically a sex worker. I've got some requests of PH users who sent me some messages. One guy just wanted me to shoot a girl who would say, "Hi, John." I changed the name. "I love you, John." "I miss you, John," and so on. I guess this guy has nobody who talks to him. "My name is John, and I hate every single one of you." Username checks out. Was asked to just hug a girl on my chest, occasionally kissing her forehead. Her brother died in a car crash I think, and she had no one else. Edit. Wow, didn't expect this to get so many upvotes. Thanks guys. Edit 2. My highest upvoted comment. Thank you guys so much. 3. Edit 3. Thank you so much for the awards, generous strangers. 3. I once had someone who gave me $250 a week to just talk and smoke weed with him. No sex at all. He was very lonely because his wife passed and just wanted female company. One day he broke down during one of our hangouts saying how much he wished his wife was here. I just let him cry while I held him. I'm high RN and this hit me directly in the feels. This is a different kind of interaction of similar tone. And I had a phone sex client. It became clear after a few calls that I think his only interactions were online and involved giving money for attention back. I don't know if he had the means to keep this up or not, but he got very weird around the 5th call. Upset I wasn't online as much to talk. Wanted to talk all throughout the day, and when he couldn't afford it would try to haggle me lower in price. I told him that this amount isn't healthy for the mind and he should seek therapy. I was diagnosed with PTSD and had wonderful therapy that changed my life around. He got upset at me and blocked me. 2 days later, I wake up to text messages asking me to take him back. He sent photos of the front and back of all of his credit cards to prove he was serious. I felt so bad for him. Former escort here. I didn't do it for long. Had a few clients who were nice, a few who were weirdos. Pretty standard stuff. One evening I am contacted by a guy for an evening dinner date, but wanted the whole evening. Nothing unusual there. I agree a price that means I'll stick around until breakfast, and he asks me to meet him at a restaurant I knew. When I meet him in person, I couldn't believe my eyes. This guy was gorgeous, and I mean paid model pretty. I couldn't understand why he contacted me. The man had 3 stunning women eyeing him up as soon as he entered the room. Still, he was nice and sweet, although clearly incredibly nervous. So we sat and drank and talked, ate our food and generally had a pleasant evening. He took a while to open up, so I did most of the small talk to start with, but he soon opened up and seemed like a real, genuine nice guy. Still baffled as to why this guy needed to hire a sex worker. The meal came to an end and he started to close up again. I started to think he was a virgin who was super nervous. I pegged him for early 20s, so maybe he was embarrassed about never having had sex before. I called us a cab to take us back to his place. When we got through the door, he rushed to the kitchen and grabbed a bottle of booze, I forget what, and just started chugging. I took the bottle off him and tried to get him to relax. Told him to take a breath, put on some music and to meet me in the bedroom. I stripped off for him and waited for him to come in. I figured if he was this nervous then undressing me would be tricky. Eventually he walked in, eyes turned to the floor. I sat him on the edge of the bed, unzipped his trousers and started performing oral sex on him. He wasn't hard, but had obviously been trying to get an erection once I left him alone. Perhaps he was semi-impotent. He started breathing heavily, so I thought he may be starting to relax. After a minute of this I looked up at him to say something, and realized he was breathing heavily because he was trying to hold back tears, which wasn't working because they were rolling down his cheeks. His face was screwed up in agony and his hands were white where he was gripping the bedsheets so hard. So I asked him what was wrong. He burst into tears and started sobbing uncontrollably. Turns out he was gay. He had tried coming out to his parents, and apparently his mum basically carried on like he hadn't said anything. But his dad just kept laughing, saying it was a phase. He would get over it. When he tried to convince his dad the feelings were real, his dad made him phone me. We sat and talked for hours about he had never been able to tell anyone about his sexuality, and that his parents had been the first people he confided in. He hadn't got many friends because he was worried about being bullied, and he had always known he was gay, so he had never had a girlfriend. I just cuddled him while he talked, not saying a word. When I left in the morning he tried to give me money, but I left it on his counter after he got in the shower. I wanted to text him later to see if he ever sorted things out with his parents, but at the time I felt like he might think I was weird because I wasn't his friend. I was a cool girl. A few weeks later I saw his picture on the local news, and my blood ran cold because I knew the instant I saw it what had happened. There is only one reason you see a Facebook photo of someone on the local news. I heard from some friends in college that he had hung himself because his dad basically disowned him. I feel sick every time I think about it. Perhaps things would have gone differently if I'd have stayed in touch. My wife is a dancer and the saddest story she told me was about a Syrian, I think, refugee. He'd been in America for 2 years waiting on paperwork for his family to follow him and immigrate. He felt really guilty for being there but was really lonely and just wanted a hug to be held for human contact. Told her about his family the whole time. This was a long time ago, but for an hour of his 90-minute session he just sat there and talked about his ex-wife who hated him. He also asked me if he should stop financially supporting his stepson because he wouldn't stop smoking weed in his house. Then read me some poetry he wrote about his ex-wife. I never saw him again, but he emailed me more of his poetry afterwards. How was the poetry though? I don't know why, but I was honestly expecting to read some story about a guy who just lost his wife and didn't want to be alone for a night. Instead the first thing I see is, guy cried because sex worker didn't want to shove pencils into his dong hole. Man, people are freaky deaky. She sort of built up the request. Initially she asked for a conversation. She then broke into tears from which I hugged her. She didn't seem to let go and simply clinged onto me. Her request for physical contact was kisses on the forehead. I didn't charge her. Edit. Thank you generous stranger for the award. 3. I could go on for days. Can't tell you how many men I've seen on the brink of devastation who just needed a listening ear and a warm touch. People are fragile creatures. Edit. My first award. Not one in particular, but I have had a few clients who were severely disabled, like in the way that they were paralyzed and required mechanical ventilation. It makes me super frustrated and sad for these gents because they still need a physical touch that isn't a medical necessity. They still have desires and wants, but they're literally trapped because they can't go anywhere on their own and because of the stigma of sex work. They don't think their family would allow a FSSW to visit. There's an indie film called The Sessions about that very subject. I was really surprised at how much I enjoyed seeing the story play out. Not necessarily a voyeuristic pleasure, but a heartfelt vibe. I've always been a huge indie film type. There's so much more real life in a project that relies on talent, rather than budget. Hello robotic YouTubers. Edit number 001. Mandatory speech of gratitude. I await platinum with anticipation. He wanted to make me the beneficiary of his life insurance, then have me go to Colombia separately from him, meet up with him and kill him erotically. I'm still not sure if he was being serious or wanted to kill me. He did say he had a degenerative disease that'd leave him completely paralyzed in a few years. And he did have me use some wire mesh condom on a big dildo up his ass until I got uncomfortable with how bloody he was getting. He wanted me to continue sanding his hole. At least he tipped really well afterwards. I'm a stripper, if you count that amongst walkers. The saddest thing to me is that people seem to expect that it's always gross or sad. There are a lot of different ways to be a stripper and I can only speak to my own experiences. There's a lot of stigma around it and all kinds of sex work, at least in the US. But I wish people could see without so much judgment how healing this type of work can be for both the clientele and the provider. Many of my clients, especially regulars, come to see me as much for the emotional intimacy as well as physical intimacy. It makes me sad that so many straight men don't feel like they can be emotionally vulnerable or intimate unless it's with a sexual partner, or, in my case, a sexy stand-in. But at the same time I am really touched to be there for some of them and hold that kind of space. Nothing super sad, but one of my old regulars was a volunteer firefighter who lived alone in a big house. Called me when he'd get off a bad shift, and during our sessions he rarely spoke. He would just lay beside me for up to a half hour at a time, quiet and still. One time he called me Mary, not my real name, and never acknowledged it, so I didn't either. I like to think seeing me was comforting in some way for him. That's the thing about sex work. Society may see it as just girls selling their bodies for cash, but there's so much emotional work that goes into providing a safe, enjoyable, intimate experience for a complete stranger. Just hold me, please. Silent tears ensued. I'm starting to get an impression that sex work is closer to therapy than just sex. I only do online work, and I sometimes feel sad about the humiliation vid requests I get. There was a guy who wanted me to call him his slave, ask him to put his head in the toilet, do my things and flush it down. He offered me good money for it, but I couldn't take something like this up. Not a worker, but in college I was in Vegas and thought it would be cool to bang a prostitute. Anyway, I found this well-dressed, well-kept Asian girl and I was amped. I was a little nervous, not gonna lie, and before she did anything she broke down in tears saying that she can't live this life anymore. Originally she did it to provide for her daughter, but her daughter was killed in an automotive accident, and she has the ability to go back to school, but if she leaves the game it could cost her her life. I told her I'm in really no position to help her as I'm 21 years old and helping her would just put both of us in danger. She left, and I hope she's doing well today. Had this old man just come in and who literally brought food for us to eat and just chat because he was lonely. I had sex with a 23-year-old guy who was younger than me by 3 years, and his wish was to have sex as his last dying wish, he wanted me to make him feel loved, as if he found the right person for him, he never found anyone in his life that could make him feel better, so I had to stand up for him. Damn, he was a good guy and yet he had cancer. Not me, but a friend of mine. This happened recently too. We were out drinking and decided to call 2 local escorts, and also got a hotel for ourselves with 2 queen beds. They came knocking on the door shortly after. It was two really young and nice looking girls in their 20s, both blonde. Somehow his escort, or should I say partner, looked a lot like his ex-wife. His ex-wife cheated on him while we were deployed overseas. We are both in the army. He loved her really much, and also because of the alcohol I guess. He hugged that girl for a long while and cried. I felt bad for him. He was saying I loved you so much. Why did you do that to me etc. He held her in his arms and kept crying and kissing her forehead. He fell asleep after a while. I told her that I am sorry that my buddy got emotional and explained to her the situation. She said it's okay and she would sleep next to him the whole night and that we only need to pay for 2-hour fee instead of overnight. The next day morning my buddy tipped her pretty good and told her to take care of herself. Not gonna lie, I was a stereotypical type when it comes to sex workers, but she really changed my view about it. Whoa, you made it to the end? You're a ducking beast. I'll cut you a deal. Smash like and subscribe for more curated content, bruh. It's free and that's a great price.